and charity.
Heard around the world on your Android and Apple mobile devices.
The Simple Truth, rising up to explore the difficult topics of real life. Join us as we proclaim the good, the true, and the beautiful with the simple truth of Jesus Christ and His Holy Catholic Church through Scripture, tradition, and the Catechism. And now, your host, Jim Havens.
It is great to be back with you on The Simple Truth, where we proclaim the life-giving reality of Jesus and His Catholic Church. We consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of St. Joseph. It is Throwdown Thursday, where we focus on themes of spiritual warfare and the real challenges that are before us, all to better understand the battles that we are in, to actively, effectively engage in fighting the good fight, to participate with the grace of God that is being lavished upon us, and to share in the victory of Christ now and for all eternity. Our guest today writes, quote, "More and more we conceive of God less and less, until He becomes little more than an extension of ourselves, or a therapeutic being who serves to comfort and affirm us. He must decrease, we must increase, is our modern mantra," end of quote. Of course, she's pointing out that that's completely upside down, but let's remember as we begin today, the quote that is often attributed to St. Joan of Arc: "All battles are first won or lost in the mind." Our guest today is going to help us to win some battles. Noelle Mering is with us. She is a Catholic wife and mother of 6, a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, co-author of Theology of Home 1 and 2, editor for theologyofhome.com, a frequent contributor to various publications. You can find her at noellemering.com. She's also the author of the book we want to get into today, Awake, Not Woke: A Christian Response to the Cult of Progressive Ideology. You can get it at tanbooks.com. Noelle Mering, thank you so much for being with us. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing quite well.
Excellent. Well, your book has been doing quite well. I noticed last week at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, that they incorporated the title of your book, Awake, Not Woke, as the overall theme of their event this year. What did you think of that? Was it somewhat surreal to see the name of your book plastered in that big signage framing the stage at CPAC?
It was completely surreal. They had reached out to my publisher maybe a month and a half earlier, just floating the idea. And so but seeing it live and in person was really, really surreal and kind of stunning. But it was great. It was great to be there and just to be a part of that in any way. I was really grateful to just be included.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think it was about your book that most resonated with the CPAC organizers?
Well, I think the title is simple and says a lot without too many words. It's only 3 words, but it kind of gets a point across. It says what we're resisting, and it also says what we are for, right? We are for, not just against something, but we are for something. And that's with the fullness of, being awake and all that implies. And it also has, a clear scriptural connotation. There's a spiritual aspect to that concept of being awake. And living in an illuminated state, so you can see clearly and think with the reality and the fullness of truth. And I think that that's contrasted well with what the woke movement does, which is kind of wanting to keep us in a reduced filter where we see evidence of the ideology of the woke movement. So I think maybe they just found it to be an effective title and knew that the book was maybe okay, so they had adopted that, and it was great. It was great to see.
Yeah, terrific. And finally, what was your experience there like? What did you learn at CPAC? What would you say would be your main takeaway?
It was a lot of fun. I spoke with so many people. I would say that my main takeaway was just how much it felt like a big tent, in certain ways. It didn't feel like everyone there was, from, my Catholic world. There was certainly a large evangelical contingent. It was really diverse in age. There were a lot of young people, great youth presence, and a lot of older people, middle-aged people, and it was also really racially diverse, and that was wonderful to see too. And I think mostly the takeaway I got was that people were feeling encouraged, enthusiastic, and are just sort of sick of a lot of the lies that have been about what it is to be someone who would go to CPAC. I think that there's been such a propaganda campaign to make it you're, an person not to be tolerated, that your ideas have no merit and you're just a bad person. But that wasn't my experience. So I think that's my main takeaways, is just how dynamic it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good to hear. We're talking with Noelle Mering. She is author of Awake, Not Woke. You can get it at tanbooks.com. Noelle, you write in the introduction that, quote, this book is an attempt to name what is poisoning us. In order to do that, we have to understand the history, premises, and tactics of woke ideology, which is fundamentally an ideology of rupture, end of quote. I think most have a general sense of what the term woke has come to mean, but it's probably good to make sure. Can you further define this term woke for us?
Sure. I mean, I think that the way they would define it, people who are woke, so the most maybe neutral, sympathetic definition would be that it is the state of being alert and attuned to the various layers of oppression in society, from racial oppression to, feminism and gender ideology and, the LGBTQ movement. But I think more accurately in the presupposition, it's adopting sort of a Marxist conflict theory and a sense of raising our consciousness to filter all of relationships, all institutions, all society through one lens of power. That all the aforementioned are motivated by and engaged a power dynamic. Person is victimized and the other person is perpetrated. And I think that's a really reductive filter, and one that serves well the cause, cultural revolution, and eventually potentially, a violent revolution. But it's not one that serves well the cause of having a unified country and unified communities, unified marriages, unified anything, really. And that is really why I think it is a movement that's based on, fed off of built-in division and rupture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your book stands against all of that, as it is described here in the tagline, a Christian response to the cult of progressive ideology. So not woke, but rather awake. And you quote Ephesians here, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give you light. So explain a little bit more about that term awake for us, to just help us to understand the other side of the coin here. What does that term more fully mean as we dive into your book, Awake?
Sure. Well, I think that as followers of Christ, we're called to seek the truth, that we are called to follow the truth wherever it leads us. So we're not afraid of, scientific truth, philosophical realities, theological truths, both revealed and natural. We're not afraid of having the truth in our hearts. In fact, as Catholics, we're called to examine our conscience, go to confession, take stock and responsibility of our own, the state which we fail in generosity and fail in love for Christ. That is prompting us to think with the truth. And I think the woke movement is a true to type ideology in which it, takes partial truths, things that are true, points to real injustices, for example, but then it totalizes them as though that's the whole story, the beginning and the end. And it creates this sort of filter through which we see there's a great C.S. quote to bring the spiritual part of it into it. Beyond, of course, the scriptural passage, but also C.S. Lewis has this great quote to paraphrase, where that he believes in Christ, believes in God similar to how he believes in the sun, that God is real, but then also through that light, that illumination, he's able to see everything else more clearly. And I think that the woke movement is the opposite, invites us to see everything, not through light and illumination, but through reduces it, and also signs and the love and grace of God, but rather signs and shadows of our oppression and power dynamics and this sort of thing. So to be in the light is really to be a call to see things as can. And the world is really that sort of goal of it has or difference. And so that invites back to them. You want truth, you want to invite criticism, you want to invite debate, you want to invite dialogue. If your goal is for rather power, you don't want to invite criticism or debate, you actually want to silence it. And I think what this is part of what we're seeing that people to is this sort It's not just as a disagreement or an intellectual difference, a representation of something evil and oppressive. And I think that the mind really rejects, tradition of classical. It's that.
Mm-hmm. Very important distinctions here with Noelle Mering, author of Awake Not Woke. You can get the book at tanbooks.com. Thanks for sticking with us here. We're obviously having a bit of audio problems. We're going to get that fixed during the break, which is coming up in just a moment. But in the meantime, I just want to share this. I think this goes along quite well with what we're talking about today. And this is from the beginning of Pope John Paul II, St. John Paul the Great, his encyclical Veritatis Splendor. And he says, look, no one can escape from the fundamental questions, what must I do? How do I distinguish good from evil? The answer is only possible thanks to the splendor of truth, which shines forth deep within the human spirit. As the psalmist bears witness, there are many who say, oh, that we might see some good. Let the light of your face shine on us, O Lord. Psalm 4:6. The light of God's face shines in all its beauty on the countenance of Jesus Christ, the image of the invisible God, the reflection of God's glory, full of grace and truth. Christ is the way and the truth and the life. Consequently, the decisive answer to every one of man's questions, his religious and moral questions in particular, is given by Jesus Christ, or rather is Jesus Christ himself. As the Second Vatican Council recalls, in fact, it is only in the mystery of the Word incarnate that light is shed on the mystery of man. For Adam, the first man, was a figure of the future man, namely of Christ the Lord. It is Christ, the last Adam, who fully discloses man to himself and unfolds his noble calling by revealing the mystery of the Father and the Father's love. We're going to be right back on The Simple Truth with Noelle Mering today. Stay tuned.
This is Jesse Romero, host of Jesus 911, heard weekdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm joined each day by a variety of co-hosts like Ruben Nava, Paul Clay, Dan Schneider, and my amazing wife, Anita Romero. We tackle Catholic devotions, spiritual warfare, family life, saving America, and everything in between. Join us each weekday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific for Jesus 911. You can also catch a bonus encore Saturdays at noon Eastern. God bless you. Keep the faith.
Love really indicates where our values are, where our priorities are, and it shows our true love of God.
You mentioned the thermometer of love, Father. In entry 343 of the diary, it begins, true love is measured by the thermometer of suffering.
Tune in for Divine Mercy in My Soul every Sunday morning at 11.
And catch the encore presentation every Tuesday evening at 8.
Jezu ufam Tobie.
Jesus, I trust in you.
This is Jesuit Father Robert McTague, host of the Catholic Current, heard weekdays at 5 p.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic radio app. Thank you to everyone who has signed up to receive my daily Lenten audio reflections in your email each morning. If you haven't signed up yet, there's still time to receive this daily spiritual nourishment, ready for you to use whenever you're ready to use it. Sign up for the daily Lenten reflections at thestationofthecross.com or on your iCatholic radio app. That's thestationofthecross.com or the iCatholic radio app. Throughout the holy season of Lent, let's support each other in prayer. God bless you.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Noelle Mering. She is author of the book Awake Not Woke, a Christian response to the cult of progressive ideology. You can get it at tanbooks.com, tanbooks.com. Noelle, you write here that the weakness of most Christians today is not that we are too strident, but that we are too cowardly. Tell us about the influence of woke culture in Christianity. What have you noticed?
Yeah, well, certainly we don't want to be either extreme. We don't want to be strident or harsh. We also don't want to be cowardly. But I think one of the tactics of the woke movement has been to portray any sort of normative, any sort of proclamation that there is a truth, a moral truth to be had with the nature of marriage, or that man is man, woman is woman, all these sorts of things, that to portray those sorts of statements as being stridency in themselves, that even to proclaim that there is a truth, that the moral teachings of the church is harsh. And so I think that's created, a lot of cowardice within ourselves, that we don't want to be branded that way. We don't want to be told, come across as harsh, and we feel like maybe that'll compromise our Christian witness, that people see us as uncompassionate. And I think that that's an understandable instinct, but I think more that we can realize that is a type of manipulation to sort of shut down the church's teachings or the spreading of the church's teachings. And that because the manipulation actually is harming real human people, because people long to live in the truth, and the church's teachings are for the sake of our happiness. And so they have to be proclaimed with great love and compassion, certainly, but they still have to be proclaimed. So I think that's just something we need to be aware of and we're really clear about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Noelle Mering, author of Awake, Not Woke, tanbooks.com. You write, quote, woke Christianity, if such a thing might be said to exist at all, will inevitably reject Christ in all but name, and of quote, explain why this is.
Yeah, I think that they really are incompatible, and the woke movement can live sort of parasitically off of Christian instincts towards compassion and justice, because certainly we're called to be compassionate and to fight for justice. But it like a Trojan horse brings a whole host of ideological concepts into the activism that will actually force us to either reject it or reject Christ. That the movement fundamentally stands athwart any concept of a God, a logos, who is, the authority over the world, to whom we should bend a knee and have great reverence towards. That there's a moral order to the universe and to our very bodies, the bodily meaning is something real and beautiful. Rather, the woke movement tells us that our bodies really fundamentally mean nothing. It's a nihilistic movement at its core, and that started, in the sexual revolution by telling us that, casual sex was good and that part of our liberation. And we see it, in more acutely in the transgender movement, that tells us we can be anything we want. And by being anything we want and defines a bodily reality, they're really telling us that our bodies mean nothing, that we mean nothing. And this is utterly incompatible with the life in Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're talking with Noelle Mering today. She is author of Awake, Not Woke, a Christian response to the cult of progressive ideology. You can get it at tanbooks.com. Let's open the phone lines. If anybody wants to get in a question or comment today, you can feel free to do so by calling 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. Noelle, in one of my favorite lines in the book, you write, quote, because we don't know how to suffer well, we suffer loudly. We are drowning in puddles when we should be learning to swim in oceans. End of quote. You go on to explain that suffering is intimately tied to meaning, and you point to remarks that Viktor Frankl made on the topic. We have a clip of those remarks. It's an expanded version, in fact, and it's a few minutes, but I think it's worth every moment to grasp the important point that he is making. Let's have a listen and get Noelle's thoughts on the other side. And quick note here, Viktor Frankl, for those who might not be familiar with him, was an Austrian psychiatrist. He spent 3 years in 4 different concentration camps during World War II, and then after his liberation, he wrote an outstanding book called Man's Search for Meaning, which examined why some gave up their will to live and some did not. Here he is, Viktor Frankl from 1979.
Because we are living in a society, either in terms of an affluent society or in terms of a welfare state, as we in Austria are living in. Anyway, these types of societies virtually, or at least they are out virtually to satisfy and gratify each and every human need, except for one need, the most basic and fundamental need operant in man, the need for meaning. consumer societies, even creating needs. But the need for meaning, or as I'm used to referring to it, the will to meaning remains unfulfilled. It's what I'm used to as, calling recently the unheard cry for meaning. You scarcely will find any reference to what is the most fundamental and basic concern of man. Neither pleasure nor happiness, nor power or prestige, but originally and basically his wish, his desire to find and fulfill a meaning in his life, or for that matter, in each single life situation confronting him. And if there is a meaning to fulfill, if he's aware, if he becomes cognizant of such a meaning, then he's ready to suffer, he's ready to offer sacrifices, he's ready to undergo tension, stress, and so forth, without any harm being done to his health. But if there is no meaning available, no meaning in his visual field, then he takes his life. Can you imagine a situation for a human being which is more full of stress than Auschwitz? And virtually all neurotic symptomatology disappeared in Auschwitz. And the degree to which suicide took place in Auschwitz and Dachau was astonishingly, surprisingly low. And on the other hand, in the welfare state of Austria, a teacher showed me a list of questions his students, his pupils, were allowed to ask him, and you know what was top ranking on the list as to the frequency of the questions? Suicide among youngsters of 14 to 15 years of age in a welfare state such as Austria. Suicide. There were virtually no stress or tensions because they are pampered. Nobody allows himself to challenge them. What young people need are ideals and challenges, personal tasks, and to begin with in the first place, examples, personal examples, but not the coward people who don't venture to confront them with anything because they might become angry because they are challenged. Neither parents nor school teachers are courageous enough to challenge them.
That was Viktor Frankl, author of Man's Search for Meaning, from 1979. I want to thank Noetic Films for making that video available. Noelle, what jumps out to you as most helpful to us as you hear that?
Well, it's so excellent. It's hard to even add to it. But I think the thing that jumps out is that we fool ourselves time and again. The story as old as man, that the good life, the life without conflict, without struggle, is the life of happiness, and it's really a lie. That the human person actually senses that there is some great, I think, triumph that is possible within our spirit, that our spirits, our souls are made for something great, higher and greater, and that we want purpose. And I think that the life that tells us that there is no meaning to our bodies, no meaning to our lives, is really one of despair, and it naturally leads to suicide, I think, in that light. And I think it's the greatest oppression that we can exact upon the human person, is to tell him that his life means nothing. But this was really deliberately done by the movement. You know, the seeds of the woke movement were born in the Marxist ideology that said, you know, an obstacle to revolution is the faith, because the faith gives us something to suffer for. It tells us to suffer well our circumstances, and that there's a greater, you know, there's a triumph to be had in Christ. And that really proposes a great obstacle to revolution, because revolution needs people who are not suffering well, but suffering loudly, as I said in the book, that they are suffering with a scream. And that scream is the scream that leads to revolutionize society. So you need people who are agitated, who see no purpose in their suffering, no purpose in their circumstances, and only see the evils being done to them if you want to revolutionize the society.
Yeah, that's really good. Speak to us a little bit more on that, on this idea of woke ideology being not just associated with this collapse of meaning, but actually in some ways being part of the design that is seeking to bring about this collapse of meaning. What more can you tell us to connect those dots?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that the other obstacle to the revolution they found was in the family. And I think you really see the collapse of the family, the dots being connected, because a person's first introduction to his or her significance is generally through, the face of his mother, or the value and the responsibility imbued in him into the life of family with his father and mom and mother. And we've really deprived people of that sort of meaning. And so what happens is that you have a whole society of people that are wounded and are looking to find their significance somehow, and didn't have that kind of harmonious group identity that came from that original natural tribe of the family. And so they turn to something that's more like tribalism. It's sort of like when someone goes to look for a gang, to initiate themselves into a gang because they didn't have a stable family. They're looking for what the family should have provided: belonging, protection, loyalty. But it's in this distorted way that's kind of built on complicity and guilt and, these sort of distortions of what the family was, a well-functioning family built upon. So I think that collapse of the family really closely and pretty immediately contributes to the collapse of those higher meanings, the suffering, the purpose. They're interconnected, and the revolutionaries were, of course, correct and brilliant in the way that they identified this as being the way to revolutionize the culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you give us this great example in the book of St. Maximilian Kolbe and his friendship, his deep friendship with Christ. You say this is why he was able to give his life freely and with joy for the sake of another prisoner in Auschwitz. You say it is this friendship that is profoundly liberating, not with the scant liberty of licentiousness, but with the true freedom of an eternal family. And then you say, while woke culture is in many ways born of a decadent time, we always run the risk, and in 2020 it seemed the sudden reality that the trappings of decadence will be stripped away with war, pandemic, riots, or natural disaster. Introduced into the void left behind will be something, be it a deep religious revival of meaning or something more sinister in the guise of a solution. The tension between these two options is a battle fought both within societies and within the heart of each person. That is what we are talking about here. We're going to get into it further with Noelle Mering and her great book that she has written and is offering to you right now, Awake Not Woke, a Christian response to the cult of progressive ideology. You can get it at tanbooks.com, tanbooks.com. And again, whenever we bring on an author with a book, there's only so much we can get to. So want to highly encourage you to get the book. Tanbooks.com is where you go. And we're going to get to as much as we possibly can today with Noelle. But if you want to get a call or a comment in, now's a great time to make that phone call. Just give a dial right now to 1-877-511-5483, 1-877-511-5483.
This is Life News Radio. I'm Jim Anderson. A little window into the practice of abortion has opened as people like Mark Crutcher of Life Dynamics and publications like the Washington Post and California Catholic Daily have thought to ask about the social and professional acceptance experienced by abortionists. Bottom line, there is almost no acceptance. The Post looked at abortionist dating experiences. California Catholic Daily examined the social disapproval of abortion and says if abortion is just a harmless removal of tissue or cells, no different from removing a tumor, there would be no reason for social disapproval. Mark Crutcher examined professional and medical rejection. An article at lifenews.com states flatly, society will never accept the killing of unborn babies in abortions, despite all the talk about it being normal and health care. This is Life News Radio. In other headlines, President Biden is again dismissing questions about abortion. He told an EWTN reporter that he won't talk theology. Tuesday's Texas state primary elections set up incumbent Governor Greg Abbott to face Beto O'Rourke. O'Rourke promises to challenge Governor Abbott on the issue of abortion, an improbable task, which essentially means he wants to try and influence Texas into being an abortion blue state. Oklahoma is the latest state to pass a Texas-style heartbeat abortion ban. A South Dakota bill has passed banning mail-order abortions, and Tennessee and Kentucky are trying to follow
follow suit. And a UN council is blasting Iceland for its human rights record. Delegates from the Philippines and Iran demanded immediate action to strengthen public awareness and remedy the current nearly 100% annihilation of Down syndrome persons by prenatal screening and abortion. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at lifenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Noelle Mering. She is author of the book Awake Not Woke, A Christian Response to the Cult of Progressive Ideology. You can get it at tanbooks.com. Before we get into anything else, I do want to invite you, Noelle, to comment on what we were talking about right before the break, and that is what you wrote in the book about this tension between these two options being a battle fought within both within societies and within the heart of each person. These two options being, one, a deep religious revival of meaning, or something more sinister in the guise of a solution. What more can you speak to on this, and just by way of encouraging us to kind of see the choice before us individually and as a society, and to encourage us along the right path here?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that the society kind of operating without major disasters for so long kind of shielded or concealed a lot of deeper, ruptures that were happening within. And those ruptures become exposed, in times of hardship that we've been experiencing for the last couple of years. But the good news and the optimism, the hopeful take on that is that this gives us all a chance to reevaluate. How have I been living? Have I been living with my loves ordered? Am I truly living for Christ? When the stakes become higher, do I know where I stand, and do I follow Him more closely, or am I weak? Do I get consumed with fear or anxiety or anger? Or how can I find the best, most loving approach to crises? And it also invites, I think, a lot of people to find a purpose that maybe they have been ignoring. People come back to the faith. There's been a resurgence of people interested in religion, I think. These are all great and optimistic signs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. And on the negative, unfortunately, there are very real, very horrible consequences of the woke progressive ideology. Here's an example that you reference in the book from author Abigail Schreier, talking about her book, Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. This is from the Dennis Prager Show, June 2020. Here it is.
Girls today are in mental health crisis like we've never seen before. Suicidal ideation, self-harm, anxiety, these things are through the roof. They are for not only teens, but tweens, young, before they're hit teenagers. So I guess, ages 9 to 12. We've never seen suicide among this population. Now we do. So we know these girls are in terrible distress, and we know that it's linked to social media, that these girls really torment themselves in the endless comparing that goes on, and these horrible feedback loops of feeling bad about themselves that social media really encourages and exacerbates.
Give me an example. I'm really not familiar.
Say you're a high school student or a middle school student, and you feel bad about your body because it's changing so dramatically, and you've put on some weight, and you've got all this discomfort and sort of alienation in your body, which is very normal for a young girl. So you might look at another girl when you were my age and say, wow, she's much prettier than I am. I think people like her way more than they do me. Well, now you simply go on to, say, Instagram, and you see just how much they like her more and just how much prettier she is, because you see how many likes she gets. And in fact, if she goes out with friends and excludes you, it's not just something you're wondering about. Gosh, did they go to the mall without me? No, you see it on Instagram. Everybody knows they excluded you. And they may even comment on how you look. They'll post pictures of you, and they'll say how bad you look in your dress, or how much weight you've put on, or anything else. So we know that social media is incredibly cruel to girls. And because of all sorts of things in the culture that have allowed transgender identification to really rise in sort of cultural esteem and value. This is one thing that young girls have grabbed onto, they've latched onto as an explanation what's wrong with them. Oh, it must be gender dysphoria.
All right. So, Noelle, this is just one example of this very horrible woke progressive ideology being manifested. But this is very popular and entrenched in many areas throughout our nation at this point. We even had Joe Biden at his State of the Union address the other night saying the following, quote, "To our younger transgender Americans, I'll always have your back as your president so you can be yourself and reach your God-given potential." This is a man who tries to claim he's a devout Catholic, giving the complete opposite message of what someone's God-given potential and what it means to be truly yourself. So, in your sense, how vast are we? Is this overall devastation? What are we really looking at here? The vast overall devastation being wrought by this cult of progressive ideology.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we will be learning more and more about how vast it is, in the years to come, where there will be so much regret and a lot of, there's stories of detransitioners, people who have regretted deeply being put on puberty blockers and even having surgery. And we should be really clear about what Joe Biden's talking about and this movement is talking about. Under the guise of compassion, they're telling and encouraging young people to chemically be castrated, to be sexually mutilated, that oftentimes with irreversible ways, as Abigail's book points out, and also with a real social contagion, as she elucidates so well. That it's where children used to be able to lose themselves in activities and hobbies. Now, with the social media and the telephones, they're even at home. They're still very aware of themselves. It's creating this self-consciousness, and this comparison problem that really, I think, brings a lot of kind of narcissistic tendencies that are not the ones that will lead a person to really be able to reach their fulfillment and flourish in life. So these are deep and hidden, but increasingly hard to ignore pathologies that are all around us and are in almost every, almost schools. And they go right to the heart of what a human person is in a very diabolical way. So I think we're going to see for years to come the absolute damage this has done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have a whole section here, part 3 in your book on indoctrination. What stands out to you as something for people to be aware of in terms of what's taking place with this indoctrination that maybe they might not be aware of, or something that is very, very good for folks to understand that would just be really good to share right now? Is there anything that jumps out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the most talked about things right now, and something that is helpful that parents are seeing more and more, is how much, the pushing of critical theory, this sort of collectivism, CRT, how much this is being pushed, and how much parents, non-religious included, progressive, sometimes often liberal and secular parents, are resisting it, and how it's sort of like we've been manipulated for so long, but now the manipulation is clearly being put upon children, and that wakes us up to the lies that were at play the whole time. But critical theory really is, it's not just teaching history, as they say, it's trying to encourage an ideological lens in the people to whom it is promulgating itself to, particularly children. And what that does is that it says that this power dynamic that we're talking about, that their goal as students is not to learn what's true, to become critical thinkers, but rather to become activists. And that's oftentimes what school systems have turned into, is conveyor belts for activism. And that's just right in the literature, that they saw that the revolution, if it doesn't happen on the streets, is going to happen through the institutions, particularly through education. As the academy, certainly the ivory towers, but also through K through 12. And the more control they can have over children's minds at younger and younger ages, the more they can just start planting this stuff in their brains in ways that are harder and harder to uproot. So I think that that's a key thing to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're talking with Noelle Mering. She is the author of Awake, Not Woke. And Noelle, I'm going to ask you this. This just came across my desk today. It's a message showing that, so this is in the Diocese of Rochester, for an example. This comes across that what is being promoted here in this email from the diocese, from their Catholic Family Center, is this book called A White Catholic's Guide to Racism and Privilege by a Father Daniel Horan. So I'm not familiar with that, but I am somewhat familiar with this group that they've also promoted Ibrahim Kendi's books and things like that. And so it seems very problematic when we have these messages coming to us through even the bureaucracies that are there in our dioceses, and also, how many Catholic priests might be swayed by this stuff. And so we really have to be careful, even when we are dealing with our own religious leaders, don't we, on this? And any just word of advice for people, how they can maybe be awake to how this is even in the Catholic Church, and to be aware so that they don't get sucked into it.
Yeah, I think that having clarity is so key, because it really is oftentimes sold under the guise of, good intentions and good outcomes. But the more people understand that this is certainly in the church, that the church, as is the greatest target of this movement, but also the greatest remedy. And so, there's reason to be really wary. There's also reason to be very hopeful. And there's a lot of people who are unwittingly caught up in this stuff. So it's not just, it's your kind Aunt Susan, sometimes your neighbor down the street, or the nice lady at the church. And they don't understand. They're deceived by this ideology sometimes. And so, they're not our enemy. It really is the ideology that's our enemy. And so we have to have that sort of, gentle spirit and loving spirit, but also fight this ideology tooth and nail, because I think both are necessary. Because it is a serious threat to people's faith and to our church.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to get to, actually, let's see if we can get it in here. This is Carter Sneed. He is director of the Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture at Notre Dame. He gets quoted in the book. Let's go to the clip here. He has something important to say here about the damage that is being done, the error, where it comes from. So he's really drilling down into the error it all stems from, how to rectify it, or at least how to maybe remedy it one heart and mind at a time. Here it is, Carter Sneed.
What am I? I'm a will. My body itself is an instrument to the realization and pursuit of the projects of my will. My relationships with other people, to the extent that they're beneficial to my projects, I can pursue them. I can engage in these relationships. I can meet and marry someone if that makes sense in light of my larger life plans. But the moment that becomes not beneficial, the moment that becomes a kind of obstacle to my desires and my own self-constructed human concept of flourishing, then we can terminate that relationship and move on to other things. Wills encounter each other, come together in collaboration when it's mutually beneficial, but mostly wills encounter each other as adversaries in this worldview. It's a very dark vision, I think, of human life. It's flattened. It doesn't have a good account of the attachments that we have, of the relationships that we have. And it, when operationalized, leads to policies such as abortion on demand, no-fault divorce, assisted suicide, euthanasia, including non-voluntary and even involuntary euthanasia, vast forms of embryo-destructive research, human cloning, enhancement technologies, every social pathology that I've encountered as an advocate in the public square when I worked in the government, and that I teach about now as a scholar, and that I work on in my capacity as the director of the Notre Dame Center for Ethics and Culture, I think is infected by this flattened and inhuman worldview of what we are and who we are. And the counterpoint to that, which has been historically most clearly articulated and defended by the Catholic Church, is a completely different vision of what human beings are and what human flourishing is. What makes a person valuable in this anthropological view is not that you're a will or that you're powerful or that you can pursue the projects of your own devising, but rather because you are made in the image and likeness of God, and you have obligations to God, of course, and to your fellow man, because you come into this world profoundly vulnerable and situated in relationships of what Alistair McIntyre refers to as reciprocal indebtedness. We have obligations to one another. We're in this together. I come into the world not as a radical, isolated will that can pursue his own projects, but as a baby. I mean, there's something about the anthropological realities of newborns that teach us something really important about who we are fundamentally.
Some very important distinctions there from Carter Snead. Even think about our Lord in the Holy Eucharist. He comes so small, so humble, so vulnerable, right? He's calling us to love him, right? He's calling us to receive him. Same is true when he says, whatever you do to the least of these, you do it unto me. In this time where we've got this daily mass murder of the preborn and exploitation of pregnant moms in need, they're vulnerable. There's a call for us to love them well, right? We're going to be right back with Noelle Mering. We're going to get to some of the solutions, some of the restoration that we need. Talking about her book today, Awake Not Woke. You can get it at tanbooks.com. We'll be right back.
Keep up to date with the shows we bring you each day on the Station of the Cross by viewing our programming grid on our website, thestationofthecross.com, and on our iCatholic Radio app. Just click the menu icon in the top left portion of our app and select the link to our programming grid. That's at thestationofthecross.com and on our free iCatholic Radio app for Android and Apple mobile devices.
Are you holding on to an old car or truck because you think dealers won't want it? Then consider donating it to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. This is a great way to turn your unvalued vehicle into a powerful gift for Catholic radio. You'll be taking part in our evangelization efforts to continue spreading Christ's love throughout the world. Our Lord uses Catholic radio to draw more people to himself, and one of the best ways to support the Station of the Cross is by contributing to our vehicle donation program. The process is safe and simple. Your generosity will greatly benefit our mission to bring the truths of the Catholic faith to countless listeners. To find out more or to donate your vehicle today, visit thestationofthecross.com or call 1-866-628-CARS. That's thestationofthecross.com or 1-866-628-2277.
As a nonprofit lay organization financially independent from your diocese, our apostolate is listener-supported. Through your generosity, we are able to inspire countless listeners with the gospel message and help lead them to a parish to be spiritually nourished by the sacraments. The Station of the Cross thanks our supporters who have enabled us to broadcast Catholic programs for more than 20 years. Thank you for your continued support, and may God bless you and your family.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Noelle Mering. She is author of the book Awake Not Woke, A Christian Response to the Cult of Progressive Ideology. You can get it at tanbooks.com. Noelle, we had that clip right before the break from Carter Snead. He gets quoted in the book. You quote a portion of what we heard there as you begin part 4 of the book, Restoration. What did we just hear in that clip? Or anything that is on your mind right now that might be stirring that can help us to restore what has been lost?
Yeah, it's such an excellent clip of Carter, and that goes right to the heart of the second lie, I think, that I go into the book, which is expressive individualism, which is that in the first lie, the movement is telling us that we have to be liberated from these oppressive groups outside of ourselves, but the second lie is saying that we have to be freed of the oppression of the moral law, that the moral law is basically telling us to repress ourselves in ways that hinder our will and prohibit us from being fully who we ought to be, authentically, in a liberated way. And I think Carter does a great job of illuminating how much that is a destructive lie, that isn't really what makes us happy, that we're actually made to be people who find our happiness in love, in service, in generosity, and that we were born, as he said, as a baby. We come into this world vulnerable, with nothing to offer our parents other than just, that they value us as a person with human dignity, and they have responsibilities and duties towards us. And that's a reminder to us how much we are meant to walk through this world, not asserting our wills over other people, but rather trying to serve other people and fulfill our duties and live in harmony, and that sort of familial harmony that we're invited to live, in which we're invited to live.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, very good. And, a great example as well that you point out in the book is one from Marcellus Wiley. He's a former NFL football player. He's now basically a host on some sports shows. But he made some remarks when BLM, Black Lives Matter, when they were really getting really popular over the summer of 2020, and there were riots taking place, and the media was selling it to us as, well, it's just mostly peaceful protesting and all of that. Well, some of us were saying, let's actually find out more about what this group is all about. We go to the website and we see that it has Marxist roots. It's saying to bring down the idea of the traditional family. Very, very radical views that were really antithetical to the principles of our nation and to natural law, certainly to divine revelation. Really not good stuff at all. And so many were just kind of ignoring that. Well, Marcellus Wiley, who has a big platform on his sports show, he brought it to the attention of some folks, and he spoke personally to the topic. So let's play that clip now. This is Marcellus Wiley back in, I think, July 2020 on BLM. Here it is.
I don't know how many people really look into the mission statement of Black Lives Matter, but I did. And when you look into it, there's a couple things that jump out to me. And I'm a black man who's been black, and my life has mattered since 1974. And this organization was founded in 2013. I'm proud of you. But I've been fighting this fight for me and for others a lot longer. Two things. My family structure is so vital, important to me. Not only the one I grew up in, but the one I'm trying to create right now. Being a father and a husband, that's my mission in life right now. How do I reconcile that, what I just told you, with this mission statement that says, quote, we dismantle the patriarchal practice. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement. When I know statistics, when I know my reality, forget statistics. I knew this before I even went to Columbia and saw these same statistics that I'm going to read to you right now. That children from single-parent homes versus two-parent homes. The children from the single-parent homes, this is in 1995 I was reading this. 5 times more likely to commit suicide. 6 times more likely to be in poverty. 9 times more likely to drop out of high school. 10 times more likely to abuse chemical substances. 14 times more likely to commit rape. 20 times more likely to end up in prison. And 32 times more likely to run away from home. I knew that. You know why I knew it? Because a lot of my friends didn't have family structures that were nuclear like mine, and they found themselves outside of their dreams and goals and aspirations. So when I see that, or as a mission statement for Black Lives Matter, it makes me scratch my head. When I also see their mission is to eradicate white supremacy. In 2020, white supremacy is the mission. Woo, that's a lot of digging through minutia right there. I am on a show that I'm hosting along with another black guy who is hosting with me, who replaced another black guy. And that's just one example of it. So I understand, I respect your space. I respect what you're protesting for. But will you respect others who don't support that same protest?
All right, that was Marcellus Wiley on BLM back in June of 2020. Noelle Mering, author of Awake, Not Woke. What are your thoughts as you hear that? What did Marcellus Wiley get so right there?
Well, I was so taken by that video clip, for one thing, because he did it in such a winning way. He was smiling. He felt purposeful. He said, this is my mission, to be a father. And who doesn't want that? For every man who enters into fatherhood, to find such joy, purpose, and mission in that. And he could portray that so well. But I think he's really tapping into a very basic truth and saying it very profoundly, which is that the family is the greatest anti-poverty effort and initiative you can erect in society. So if we we truly care about people in hard situations and hard circumstances, that down on their luck, or in communities that have a lot of crime and a lot of social pathologies, the last thing you want to do is to argue against the structure of the family. But there's a real reason in which they don't want to do that, the woke movement, because as we talked about earlier, the family is such an obstacle to the ideology, to cultural revolution. And so they've deliberately kept this really the most effective tool we have as society in fostering the next generation and fostering individuals who can take responsibility for their lives. They've really tried to demonize that and make it seem as though it's unattainable or if it's something dark and oppressive. And he really gets to the heart of that lie quite well and effectively, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you conclude this book in some powerful ways. You speak to the priesthood, you speak to Our Lady, Queen and Mother, you speak to the city, saying the battle is not a political one, it's a spiritual one, and you use this theme throughout the book of the two cities. You go with the city of God, the city of man, St. Augustine. What do you want to share with us as we get into the final minutes here on any one of those topics, to lift up something, just to leave us in a way that that can see the path forward for the church, for the state, for society, for us individually? What do you think we ought to be focused on, keep our eye on, that comes about at the end of the book that might be good for us to end with?
I think that we need to be really clear that we're fighting this battle on three different levels. First and foremost, it's a spiritual battle, so we need to be people deeply in prayer, in sacrifice, and growing closer to our Lord in order to reflect Him more clearly to our fellow man. Secondly, we need a resolute political and practical response. We need to understand that this is something that we can effectively fight in school board meetings, in our local politics, and in media and journalism and whatever ways in which we are called. But thirdly, I think that we need to understand that this is something that has to be fought not just in a reactionary way, where we're proclaiming the bad or the lies of the ideology, but also where we are boldly and plainly and simply putting forth a vision of what is good and beautiful and true. Because the human person longs for those things. And so the more we are proclaiming them, in any way in which we can, in our lives, in media, this is part of our project with the Theology of Home books, is to be putting forth these visions of the simple beauty of living a life under the banner of our Lord, and with a recognition of who we are as people, women being women, men being men, in harmony with one another, serving each other in love and in the fruits that come of that.
Outstanding. Noelle Mering, what a great blessing it has been to have you with us today. And I want to encourage everybody, get the book Awake Not Woke. You can get it at tanbooks.com. Also, go check out theologyofhome.com. Go to also Noelle's website, noellemering.com. And I want to encourage everybody, I just remember the ultimate reality that we are in, a right view of reality. First and foremost, we are in a romance. God loves you. He is calling you to open your heart, receive His love Him back. But yes, sin has entered the world. We have a battle. We are in a spiritual war, but let's make an adventure of it. Let's dive in with our Lord and go participate with His grace step by step. Give us this day our daily bread. God bless you.
St. Paul